Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
A look at the proposed changes to the pilot tax incentives tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Steve Baser from the County Commission. Thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
And Reed Dullberger, head of EDGE, which administers the pilot tax incentive program for the city and the county. Thanks for being here again. So you have put forward, your group, EDGE, has put forward some changes to the pilot program. Maybe at a high level, tell me what those changes are about, and then we'll kind of drill down on them, talk about the pros and cons, talk about some of the projects that have been funded, some that have been proposed lately. But let's start with the high-level look at the changes as you see them and the reason behind them.
Certainly. The EDGE board has wanted to take a thorough look at our pilot program for a number of years. And again, these changes only affect the EDGE pilot program. There are 7 others currently in Shelby County. We engaged a consultant, and the 3 main themes came out of the initial round of discussions with EDGE board members and others. 1, the need to simplify our process so that we could be more competitive, particularly with our neighbors, without giving a larger incentive, but just improve the process, make it faster, less intimidating, a smoother way to go. Secondly, to strengthen our diversity program. And thirdly, to see if we can find a way to make our program relevant for inner city economic development. The program is really designed for industrial, manufacturing and distribution, large-scale commercial use, but it's not been used either by EDGE or our predecessors in inner city neighborhoods. And the question was, how can we make the program work there?
Was it not allowed to be used in inner city neighborhoods, or it just never happened?
It certainly is allowed, but the rules that we put on ourselves, particularly the focus on job creation, makes it extremely difficult to do the smaller speculative development that you would expect to see at the neighborhood level. Meaning, so if you were looking to create a small commercial strip center in one of our neighborhoods, or even a small in-city industrial park, we require the signatories to the tax abatement to commit to job creation. If you are the spec developer, that doesn't really work for you.
Yeah.
There are, quite frankly, other pilot programs in Shelby County that would have been better or are better organized for that purpose. And so at the end of the day, we looked at those programs and we said, how can we tweak ours so that if you were in Soulsville or you're in Raleigh or you were in Fraser or you're someplace in the city where we really need to be able to incentivize and assist local level development, we can be effective.
Okay, and there are a bunch more changes that we'll go through in more detail, but to get these changes done, has the board approved them, the EDGE board?
No. So these were introduced in January and discussed and tabled. Okay. They will be discussed again next week when the board meets. We do not expect a vote next week.
Okay.
And the discussion will continue, and perhaps in March or April we'll be at the point that a consensus emerges and we'll move forward.
And is that all that has to happen? Is the EDGE board, is it the county commission, the city council? I mean, who all has to sign off on this?
Well, the EDGE board has to sign off on it, but we will be before the county commission's economic development committee in early March. We'll be at city council next week, and so the discussion will begin now with council and commission about what their feelings are about these changes. Did we get it right? Are there other things they'd like to see us do?
Okay. And do you need their formal approval, or would you just like to have it so that we're all on the same page?
Well, we want to have it.
Okay.
I mean, they're critically important partners. They're elected leaders of this community. If we're not on the same page with the council and commission, something's very wrong.
Okay. And I should say we're taping this a week ahead, so there'll be some kind of time shift if people are following, but we're taping this week ahead. Steve, your take on these changes start there. Your take on the changes that have been proposed.
Well, Eric, taking the number of criteria from 32 in terms of their matrix and scoring to 8, I think is a good step in making it more simple. And as Reed talked about, they're talking about putting it on the web so you can quickly go in and figure out if you could qualify for a pilot. So I think it's important for us to streamline and simplify the process, and I think that's all good. And I've been clear with the other people on the commission in terms of, Reed's been very open to input from us, and he's actually been seeking guidance and ideas on what we like, what we don't like, and so he's been very open, and I think that's fabulous. I'd like to see, some of the discussions in terms of the minimum wage. And that's just kind of one of my things. And so that's one of the things to discuss is, I think it's $10 an hour now, but the proposal is $13 an hour. And I'm not really sure that I personally think we should be incentivizing those low wages.
Yeah, is it 12? Is it go to $12 and then there's every 3 years it would increase if the wage of the Shelby County government would increase? Did I read that correctly?
Almost got exactly right. So how we define a job to count within the pilot program. Today, that job has to pay, as the commissioner said, $10 an hour, and the employer has to partially subsidize health care. The proposal on the table from the consultant is to take that $10 to $12 an hour, which essentially is 1/2 the Shelby County average annual wage.
Got it.
Rounded down to the nearest half dollar. And then every 3 years adjust it. So that if the Shelby County annual average wage goes up over time, that our threshold wage would go up over time.
And I cut you off, and I apologize.
Sorry.
You're concerned about, say that again, about incentivizing low-wage jobs.
Yes, if we're saying the floor is 50% of the average annual wage, and that's the average annual wage for the whole county.
I got you.
I guess I'm saying that I'd like to see it a higher number than that, so maybe 75%, because I don't think we want to be incentivizing $10 an hour jobs or $12 an hour jobs. We want to be incentivizing higher paying jobs.
And from a county commission point, you've got some commissioners, and we tried to get some other folks on, and we, again, appreciate you here, but some have said have real concerns with pilots and concerns with EDGE. I mean, it tends to be a hot button issue, and you've got people talking about, why don't we have more of a say, we the county commission or we the city council? I'll put it since you're on the commission. And so you've got the specter of back in the day, and I don't know how many years ago this was, where these kinds of programs, if the city or county was going to do a big project, it would go through city council and it would go through county commission, and you had executives and company executives testifying or talking to county commission, city council. Right. Would you like to see us go back to that kind of program?
It's a good question, and my short answer is no, I don't. I mean, the whole purpose of EDGE was to make it more apolitical and take it out of that realm. And we got a board on EDGE, and EDGE, as I said, they're certainly open to our input and thoughts, but we don't want every decision to go before the city council and the county commission. I mean, if you look at what happens now in the real estate sector, when you've got somebody who has a property who wants to get it rezoned, that can take months, literally months, and you're not going to get executives who are going to go through that process. It's just not going to happen.
How then? So let me play the devil's advocate to your. I'm assuming your position is no, we don't want to go to back to that sort of approval process. But tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in property tax are being abated. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of concern among citizens and politicians. Why shouldn't they have more of a direct voice? What was wrong with that process in the past?
Well, I don't think that process ever existed.
Okay.
Certainly not within the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
Our predecessors, the Industrial Development Board, approved pilots. They didn't go before the council and commission. And so what might have happened in the 1980s or 1990s, truly I can't say. But if it ever existed, we are talking ancient history. Secondly, the commissioner is right. We live in a highly competitive world. These projects, particularly the larger ones, have choice. They have choice within our market, geographic choice. They often have choice between markets. And so the harder we make it to do business in Memphis and Shelby County, the fewer deals we're going to have. And so what do the council and commission do? They create a board of 9 senior level business and community leaders, plus a county and a city representative. And they empower them to make these decisions. If you haven't put the right people on the board, then we can address that. But we have an outstanding board of folks who spend a lot of time and energy to understand these deals and to make sure the deals are not only good deals for our community, but each of these projects makes money for our community, and we can document that. And so what I would say to your question is, if we make it more onerous from the perspective of the business we are trying to attract or retain, we will have fewer projects.
And so again, devil's advocate for a second, you talked about accountability, or you implied about accountability, and that's one of the other big criticisms of the pilot program is, well, these no one follows up. They expire and no one. I mean, you've heard these things. They say they're going to create 200 jobs, they end up creating 100 jobs. They say they're going to be X wage and they're Y wage. The promises aren't fulfilled by the company. How does EDGE work? Are these companies held accountable, and how does that accountability change in these proposals?
The myths and legends are certainly out there in the pilot program. What I find fascinating is, so you and I have had this discussion, and if nothing changes, we'll have this discussion 2 years from now. And yet it's never very specific. It's always this general, vague allegations. And I find that fascinating because you can go online on the EDGE website and get all of this information. And yet somehow these rumors, these allegations persist. And so specifically to your question, we monitor every pilot every year. And that information is in the public domain. And as a portfolio of the ones that we manage, which were the old industrial development boards that we inherited, plus the ones that we have done that have closed, the portfolio outperforms its commitments, meaning that as a group, there are more jobs, there's more investment, and the average wage is higher than that group committed to this community. Now, there are certainly individual pilots where maybe the number of jobs are up, but the wages are down, or the investment's higher, but the number of jobs is a little bit less. In those cases, we reanalyze each and every one of those to see, had we known then what we know now, would we have done anything differently? And if the answer is yes, then we do what we call a clawback. In other words, we reduce the pilot. But each pilot is analyzed every year. We go out and do site audits at these pilots. So there is a high level of compliance done on our end. And again, all of that in the public domain.
Do you agree with that? I mean, you're an elected official, responsible to the taxpayers and so on. I mean, do you feel like there is accountability and there is appropriate auditing and tracking of these projects?
I do think there is. And I think it's also important when we're talking about pilots to remember it's really like an opportunity cost. We're not writing checks to these companies. Edge is not giving them money. It's more of your taxes would have been X, but now they're going to be Y. And to Reed's point, we are making money. So every single one of these pilots, we're coming back and getting more money than we would have gotten before. Yeah. So while we're giving an abatement and we're letting someone have a discount, if you will, on their property taxes, we're getting more taxes than we would have gotten without the deal.
And let me go to maybe a most recent project that got at least some politicians a little concerned, which is the IKEA project.
Yes.
And I think the difference for that was that it was retail.
Well, yeah, and I think the biggest thing there, and Reed and I had some discussions, and one of the board members brought it up, and we had passed a resolution that we want to see specific criteria regarding retail pilots brought before the EDGE board and approved. So we don't have a kind of a one-off. We want to have specific criteria. If you're investing $50 million, if you're creating jobs that are over $40,000 a year, and if you're creating over 150 jobs, then you could qualify for a retail pilot. If you're bringing in revenue from outside of the geographic area, 30% or whatever, but we need some specific criteria, and that was I think that was the biggest thing that the political establishment had.
Well, I mean, was the concern, on a flippant level, that if somebody wants to open a little coffee shop, they're getting a pilot now? I mean, is that the kind of specter that was raised?
I think that's exactly it, which again is a little puzzling because IKEA will be the 9th retail pilot done in the city of Memphis. Uh-huh. And so some of them closer to the coffee shop than a $64 million, 269,000 square foot, national retailer. But yeah, I think that there was some concern about that. Those projects have shown up from time to time. They never, at EDGE, they don't get past the staff. We don't do those. We never had an interest or intent to do those. But I understand that people might be concerned that we would.
Right, and less flippantly, that not the coffee shop, but if Target's going to expand,
Right.
that suddenly we're doing tax incentives for, maybe it's a big employer,
Right.
but, is that the kind of thing where we need to be doing tax incentives?
Well, and I think that the EDGE would say no.
Yeah.
And to Steve's point, the IKEA was considered to be an exceptional case.
Yeah.
40 IKEAs around the country right now draw a third of their customers they're projecting to draw a third of their customers from outside our metro area, not our county, our metro area.
Right.
So that's about 500,000 customers a year driving into the area.
It's a little like the Bass Pro thing, where it's meant to be, and it
Right.
all remains to be seen whether it's successful. But it's destination retail.
Exactly.
And so it's interesting when I talk to people about Bass Pro from out of town. They're like, "That's a giant Bass Pro." Eric, who lives in Memphis, am not going to drive down to Bass Pro and pick up some fishing lures. I mean, I'm not going to do that. It's that whole idea of destination
Right.
retail, right?
Yes.
So that is within, you think, an appropriate scope of where we want pilots to be done, or at least be considered?
I think the commissioner's point, we need to have certain criteria in place. We don't need to be doing smaller projects. We need to focus, but essentially, yes, I think there are a couple places where retail makes sense. One is, I think, destination projects. And truthfully, from the IKEA perspective, a number of the board members said, if this was the IKEA distribution center, creating 175 jobs at $41,000 a year, $64 million of investment, would we have done this project? Well, of course.
Yeah.
Would we have gotten as much out of it as we would the retail? No. No sales tax revenue, no national acclaim. So destination retail at a level seems to make sense. The other thing we're looking at is inner city. So the proverbial food desert, for example. I mentioned there are 3 proposed changes to the program, one of which is to make the pilot program relevant at the neighborhood level for distressed inner city neighborhoods. Well, if we do that, the proposal on the table is that we would do essentially any project that state law allows, with the exception of residential, because at the moment, the Edge Board doesn't see residential as something that they would like to do. But that would include retail. And so the question on the table is, destination retail is one issue, but at the local level, in Soulsville, in Fraser, should we be willing to incentivize a retail project, a commercial project, an industrial project at the neighborhood level?
Let's get your take on that, the idea of a new effort within the inner city. I mean, does that make sense to you?
I think it's important that, as a community, we start working on density. And, we've been expanding out and the city's hollowed out, and we've actually lost population, even though the city's gotten larger over time. And so I think what we can incentivize to help grow and support the inner city, I think that's all good. And those are things that we should look at doing. Absolutely.
What about changes to, other changes are in the diversity requirements in the project? Describe the changes and let's talk those through.
Sure. There's essentially changes in 2 areas. And so administratively, right now, for reasons that we probably don't even need to go into, the diversity program is essentially a parallel program, separate and parallel program to the pilot program. It has its own staff, its own application, its own approval process, its own reporting, its own compliance. It's a little bizarre the way it was set up, and this goes back to, it certainly predates Edge by many years. So the first proposal is to fully integrate the diversity program into the pilot program. So we're not forcing the applicants to do these 2 parallel programs. We're simplifying things. Secondly, there's a proposal on the table to strengthen the diversity program. Right now, the way the diversity program is set up, the program we inherited from the old IDB, Industrial Development Board, is we're asking our applicants to make a best faith effort to spend 25% of their controllable local spending in one of 4, or in each of 4 categories: construction, goods, professional services, other services. Best faith effort, controllable local spend, certain amount of wiggle room. And we understand that, and flexibility is not a bad thing. However, certainty has a benefit. And so what the consultant has proposed are a couple of different formulas so that you as the applicant sitting in your office, knowing the project that you have envisioned, could look at a simple formula and go, I understand what the community expects from me. I don't have to sit down with someone. I don't have to spend a lot of time with my purchasing people. I know what this community expects from me. And that would be a floor. It would be a minimum. It would be the expectation that this is what you will be able to spend with our city-certified women and minority-owned firms and our county-certified locally owned small businesses.
Okay, your take on those. I mean, are those, because you do get some real estate developers have told me that those requirements alone are onerous. That makes us non-competitive with other areas. But I don't know what your take is on the changes to those requirements.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to have a diversity program. I think that's something the community definitely wants and requires. What that looks like going forward, I do agree with Reed that we need to have a simpler program. We need to make it easier for people and not make it so onerous, because the first thing people are, a lot of people will probably get turned away because they look at it and go, I don't even want to, it's like doing your taxes. You've got, the tax code is so big and people don't even want to deal with it. I'll pay you to do it, but
right.
So that's one thing. And I think one of the things I wanted to point out with regards to pilots is, I think a lot of politicians may not face the reality of why we need to do pilots. And a lot of it has to do with competition, but a lot of it has to do with our tax rates as well. I mean, the reality is our tax rates are almost twice what Nashville's are. And so in order for us to be competitive and compete for jobs, you know, we've got to have a little wiggle room, because sometimes that's the piece that makes the deal. And that's really what, you know, we're trying to do. And you can criticize the program, but at the end of the day, we're trying to get jobs and we're trying to win jobs for our community. And that's really what we're doing.
Let's do two of the things that we've talked about this before, but it always comes up. So I'm having you back to repeat.
Right.
That people critics of the program, pilot program, say, well, Nashville doesn't do hardly any. Why do we do so many?
Right.
And start there.
Certainly. So two responses. A, Nashville uses tax increment financing, which is a parallel program that diverts property taxes to spur inner city development. And they have hundreds of millions of dollars tied up in their, I think, 10 TIF districts. The communities outside Nashville, where the industrial projects go, do pilots.
Okay. And then in terms of the other thing that comes up is, and Commissioner Baser mentioned this, is the competition issue.
Yes.
How do we compete with, Memphis, Shelby County competes with DeSoto County, which is a very different program, and what people say, certainly people in the real estate development community say, is a much simpler, more streamlined program that they can explain more quickly. Is this closer to that model, or is it just streamlined, but it's still a very different model than they have in Mississippi?
So we compete, as you well know, so we compete regionally with other regions. We compete with the Birminghams and the Atlantas for some projects, and the Dallases, and certainly Indianapolis, et cetera. If you want to be in the Mid-South, if you've determined that this is generally the area you want to be, then we do compete with our neighbors, because as we have talked in the past, you can have access to all the amenities and assets of the city of Memphis without being in the city of Memphis or in Shelby County. The airport, the rail lines, the river, et cetera. And so part of the intent of making these changes was to simplify the program. So yes, we are as close from an administrative perspective as being on equal turf with our competitors. What we can't change is the Tennessee Constitution. So Mississippi, as do most states in the United States, have what I call statutory tax abatement, meaning that an organization like EDGE can simply grant you a tax abatement without taking title to your property. And it is that process of taking title to your property, which we can't change, that adds a level of complexity that Tennessee just has to live with.
And we just have four minutes left in show here. Mayor Wharton was on the show, I think, in December, and talked about that was a priority to try and get the legislators, the Shelby County delegation, to go forward with some changes to what he called sort of the border counties. So us, or
right.
Chattanooga, it's some I think Montgomery County and so on up near Kentucky. Is that underway? And to try and change that, the counties near where they competed across state lines against a different playing field, there'd be changes in this at the state level. Is that underway, or?
Well, that process is underway, but it wouldn't. This would require a change to the Tennessee Constitution. I don't think anybody's envisioning that. But what the mayor is looking for is you're exactly right. Both mayors are saying those of us who are on the border, who are competing with different tax structures, different incentive structures, need a leg up.
Yeah, okay. Let's shift gears a little bit, just because we have you on the show here, and again, with the caveat that we're taping this a week ahead,
Sure.
The fairgrounds proposal. It was going to come to the county commission. It hasn't yet. What is your take on the existing fairgrounds proposal as it stands?
Well, I'm encouraged by the mayor, A.C. Wharton, deciding to kind of open it up for public input. And I think when we get done with that, it's going to look different than it does today. And I think we need to do something with the fairgrounds. I'd really like to see us have a public and private partnership, and we don't have that private partner right now. And then we also haven't resolved the educational funding issue.
Talk about that. I mean, what there's a difference. We'll have had Mayor Luttrell on last week to talk about this, but that is money, as you see it, being diverted from education in the way that the TDZ is structured right now?
The current TDZ application will take the local option sales tax piece that goes to education away from that.
Right.
And that's estimated to be $55 million, roughly $2 million a year, that would have been going to education, that won't be going to education.
And the Mayor Wharton, the city has put forward a plan to, well, we'll have an agreement to funnel that back to the county to pay for the schools.
Well, I mean, I've talked with the mayor, I've talked with Harvey Kennedy, and we don't have a deal. And my understanding of it is they're being offered, pennies on the dollar. And in terms of $55 million is what we think is owed, and they're offering us maybe $10 million.
Yeah, okay.
And to try to say, here, take this is what we're offering, and I think the mayor's just saying, not good enough.
Right, and technically, they don't need the voted support of the county commission to go to the state and get a TDZ done. But the general assumption is that the state wants everyone to be on board before they're going to approve one of these things.
Absolutely.
Okay, and what is your take on the Coliseum?
The Coliseum?
Yeah.
And I think it's important to take a look at that and see. I mean, we've gotten some different numbers. There's certainly a contingency in the city that wants to save the Coliseum. I don't really have a big dog in that race or dog in that hunt, but I think it's a good building. I think it'd be nice to preserve part of that.
Okay, but so when do you think it'll come to the county commission at this point? Do you know? When do you think
it could be March if they want to get approval and they're trying to go to the building commission. If the mayor's opening it up for public input, which sounds like is going to happen, it could be a much longer process.
Okay.
And I don't see us voting on it without, now that the mayor said he's going to open it up, I don't see us voting on that before then. Now, I've got a resolution to kind of recommend a more public authority, if you will, but we'll see how that goes.
Okay. Thank you for being here, Reed Dahlberger. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.